Welcome to the Sourcing Hero podcast, produced by Una, a group purchasing organization that empowers sourcing heroes, and Art of Procurement, the world's largest procurement podcast network. I'm your host, Kelly Barner. The goal of the Sourcing Hero podcast is to capture the epic stories of people who are rising up and beating the odds to create exceptional value within procurement, directly from those heroes themselves. Today, my guest here on the Sourcing Hero podcast is Liz Milan. Liz is a former procurement executive and adjunct at the University of Portland Pamplin Business School, where she teaches a course on negotiation and persuasion. She's currently doing board work for Open Adoption and Family Services. So, hi, Liz. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Hi, Kelly. Super happy to be here.
Well, negotiation and persuasion, you had us right there. But before we dig in, can you talk a little bit about your professional journey up to this point?
I'd love to. Talking about myself is always so much fun. So again, Liz Milan, as I started my career in procurement, much like everybody else did, or many people did, which is completely by accident.
Yep.
I don't think that you go to many job fairs and say, this is such a exciting profession. I can't wait for it. And so for me, I started in politics as, a very fresh-faced, very ambitious person trying to go knock on doors and change the world, and was really excited about that. I was doing local and statewide congressional races and trying to get out the vote, get folks engaged. And what I kept encountering was a lot of no. People hated me. I was the devil. They would shut the door or bring a gun and say, get off my property. So I think as an experience, that made me feel like I was pretty impervious to hearing no.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't feel like a character assault when somebody didn't want to buy what I was selling because I'd heard it 1,000 times in a row. Great experience if you ever feel like you just need to really get thicker skin. So I started there, and after living in pretty abject poverty for a while, the nonprofit space often leads to, I picked up and ended up in tech just by accident through connections at a company that did government software. Okay. And at that time, I was on the sales side and the implementation side and doing merger work because I just so happened to land at a company that was growing really rapidly, right? We went from 42 employees up to 800. We got that whole trajectory, which was really fun, and went back to school, did a variety of different places there. I've been in logistics. I was most recently at ZoomInfo, where I was the vice president there. And then I also started picking up and wanting to teach people about the things I had learned doing mergers, things I'd learned doing just big contracts for city governments or for software purchases, technical, et cetera. And that sort of just filling needs and finding that people needed to make sure our contracts were correct. We needed to have a repository. We needed to have some way to track when things were going to reoccur or think about strategically how we could consolidate two companies' purchases. That's sort of the organic way that I ended up in procurement. And I ended up also just having really incredible mentors who saw something in me and felt like bringing me to sit at the table even when I had absolutely no business being there.
Yeah.
So now I get the benefit of sitting on boards and telling other people what to do, which is also funny, but great.
Well, and it's so funny you bring up politics, a little bit of a digression, but this brings us back to our main topic.
Right.
I've also done some local and statewide different types of campaigns. It is amazing what you will learn about how to talk effectively to people, or I should say how to communicate effectively, because it's not always speaking, but you do learn things about how simple does your message need to be? Learning to repeat messages. Like, there are 3 reasons we should do this. Boom, boom, boom. Right. And they're always the same. And you repeat. There are incredibly valuable things that I've certainly learned going from one sphere to another, just because trying to reach people at scale makes you that much more effective communicating with people in small groups or even one-on-one.
It absolutely does. And I think it's as much listening to and
Yes.
trying to find those connections, because it is such an exercise for us in identifying the places that we have overlap and where we have commonality that drive home your message, right? Like you can
Absolutely.
have somebody, and it is not even uncommon for you to already agree and then sell past yes, or have it degrade your message by not listening enough.
Absolutely. Now, if we bring this idea of communication skills together with either persuasion, if we're keeping it general, or negotiation as it might be applied in procurement, where do these two things come together? Because, at a high level, you can sort of see, okay, communication skills, people skills, to your point, listening, because communication isn't just talking. How can we be purposeful about using our good communication skills to win people over and persuade them?
Great question. I think that's always the question. The it's I'm always endeavoring to be understood.
Yeah.
So things that I think about, right, is how am I conveying to the other person that I'm hearing them, that I'm understanding them? Are they going to be more likely to listen to me when I understand what they're saying, right? So repeating back something that somebody's asked. Oh, are you saying this? Asking intuitive questions, asking probing questions, discovery, right? So like when I think about communication or negotiation, the first action that you're doing is trying to really double down on your curiosity.
Yeah.
And that, more than anything, is going to start driving what real communication is, right? Otherwise, you are just trying to do talking points at someone. And that's not really the goal. The goal is to get, Pareto efficiency, so that you're at that maximum opportunity for you to find overlap. But you can't do that when you don't even really understand the full picture of what people are trying to achieve. And also, I think it comes to knowing what you're trying to convey. If you don't have a deep understanding of what you want,
Yeah.
how are you ever going to get to that higher level of negotiation?
Absolutely. Now, it's interesting because when we think about negotiations, there's always the procurement side of a business and there's always the sales side.
Right.
And when you and I spoke previously, you had talked about being in a prior role where every single sales professional you met wanted time with you because they wanted to understand more about the opportunity based on what your company did. And so there was sort of a twofold interest in every one of those situations, sort of a balance of trade, I think is how you described it. What was it
Very,
like sitting in the middle of that?
very common, right? So I think you run into what I would consider like a balance of trade scenario the more you have an overlapping TAM, or a total addressable market, right?
Yeah.
So in one case, I was working in logistics. Many people sell things, right? So then they need those things to be delivered. They need the whole supply chain to exist. In another case, I was working in sales software where everybody that's selling needs a tool to sell. So in that case, people are coming to me and saying, well, you're an audience that's buying, maybe there's some sort of collaboration to go on there. And I think it's actually, back to politics, particularly
Yeah.
pertinent in a space where right now we're talking about trade wars and we're talking about literally balance of trade. But it's not at all uncommon in the business world that you are looking to decide which vendor you're going to use and saying, are they also supporting me? Are they also, contributing to my bottom line? Or should I pick somebody else that is a better partner for me? And to what degree am I going to experience those two types of tensions? But I mean, that also goes back to having a much tighter relationship with your
Yes.
sales team. And, like I said, I started in sales, but I am obviously on the buy side now. And especially when you have these overlapping communications, the idea that as one company, you're not talking to both departments is crazy to me. Right. And I see
Yeah.
that all the time where one hand isn't talking to the left. And, you don't certainly want to be in a space where you're using one negotiation tactic in yours that you don't want to be
Yes.
used against you, or you don't want, to be held hostage to doing a deal on a timeline that also is accountable to sales. Of course, you can't know how to do that unless you are covering both those bases. Sorry, that was a bit meandering.
Yeah. Now, given that you have experience with perspectives on both the sales and procurement sides, did you see this sort of being part of the balance of trade as an opportunity? Did you see it as an annoyance? How did you sort of, let's say, viscerally feel about it as you were going through those situations?
Certainly both. I think that, so on the whole, and academically speaking, starting a balance of trade war or something where it goes back to what David or Robert Axelrod was writing about when he was talking about like a repeated prisoner's dilemma. Yep. And in a prisoner's dilemma, the best thing is to not fight with the other prisoner, right? To not let anybody pitch you against each other. That is your best outcome. Your next best outcome is to go tit for tat. So where you have more of that balance of trade. So ideal scenario, never start it. Second best, find some kind of equitability. And I would say it can really depend, right? If you are in a position of more power, you can exert more power.
True.
If you are not, then you are going to be bludgeoned over the head, right? If I think about something where you also may have multiple, when I think about like the annoyances, things that are common to happen, is that you might have two vendors that are also customers. Yeah. And so when you select one, you are causing a problem with the other. Well, that's not at all uncommon in creating tech sprawl, right? Yep. So do I want to have to choose the tools that I'm using based on my customers, right? So your engineers might say like, I didn't like that tool. I don't want to use it. But your revenue side is saying, yeah, but it's really profitable if you take a little bit more annoyance in this space. So, as an ambassador to both, you have to find a way that like the overall company is going to benefit from the choice that you make. And again, that's going to go back to the very first thing I said, which is like truly understanding what a good outcome looks like for you and knowing what you need, right? Are you even going to be able to use the tool if you buy it? Or is it just going to be shelfware?
Right.
And so there's that layer, which is like, it can be a nuisance because it can cause unintended consequences. It can take away your focus from what you are using that you do like. But it can also like open up opportunities that you didn't see before. It can make you look at partners that maybe aren't the top of the market that you were considering, you wouldn't have considered, but because they are customers, you evaluate them and find something new that you might not have. So that's great. And then the even other side of the spectrum that's more, concerning is if you end up in a space where you are like in an ASC 606 problem. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that kind of an idea, it's where you could give the appearance of artificially inflating your revenue and your expenses, right? So that you have equitability when the fair market of those two products is not the same, right? So you don't want to ever end in a place where you have a ethics violation of appearance or in practice. And I think that this space particularly is rife with that opportunity.
Yeah. And it is interesting because now that my mindset is a little bit like one foot in the political realm, one foot in the corporate procurement realm, you can see there's a lot of ideas that transfer back and forth. So for me, based on what you were just saying, the word that pops into my head is constituency, right? It's not as much as, oh, I have these suppliers and they want my business. So I can treat them horribly because they need me and I have lots of choices. That is a very dangerous way to think about any market, because somewhere in your company, there may be a salesperson that's thinking, all I need to do to meet my number this quarter is get this company to re-up, extend their contract, whatever it might be. And we're all making our numbers. It is all so much more interconnected than we otherwise, I think, have a tendency to think about. What advice do you have for procurement professionals to be maybe a little more curious, maybe a little bit more proactive about understanding which of their suppliers or prospective suppliers are potentially really critical on the revenue side of the business?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're not doing regular meetings with your revenue side on this very topic, you are missing the mark. You
Yeah,
should know what key deals are going to be occurring. You should have, as far as digital technology, you should be looking at how you're conveying that information through your CRM to your procurement team and making that information readily available. Again, like Zoom Info has tools that show you where, who your prospect is at the same time and what kinds of ACV they have when you start doing the deep dive on the company,
yeah,
right? Just on the homepage. So there's a lot of tools out there that can help you see that. Sometimes you can also use like a custom fields and say like a productive or a Xylo or different type of spend tools that will give you visibility to say if a flag for if they're a customer or not and when their counter renewals are. Right. So you want to be able to see what that cadence is. You may have an interest in lining them up if you are in the weaker
sure.
position, and certainly not if you are considering leaving. Right. So those are just choices. But one other thing I think is really important. You should never treat your vendors horribly.
No, you should never.
Never. You should start by being a good person to just all the time. So,
Everybody. That's equivalent to starting a fight in prison, right? So we're back to the prisoner's dilemma. Do not start a fight.
Just don't start a fight. Like there are lots of ways. There's absolutely no reason to be awful. So that's just, and I do know it, like things get heated. Business gets hard.
Yes, they do.
Right? Like you'll never find somebody as passionately in your corner as someone that you have fought with, repaired, and then gone through tribulations. But you don't need to artificially create those. You're going to have plenty of those just existing.
Absolutely. Now, Liz, as we start to wind this down, I want to bring you in on a tradition we have here at the Sourcing Hero. So I'm going to give you 2 questions. You can pick either one, and every single answer imaginable is correct.
Oh, goodness.
So your choices are, and this is very low pressure. We're not starting a fight in the prison with this question. Sure. Your choices are, what does the idea of a sourcing hero mean to you? Or if you want to go a little bit broader, what do you think heroism looks like in a business context?
Oh, man. So when I think of heroism or when I think of any of these things, I think that they come down to sacrifice. And it's easy to be brave when everything that you do turns up roses for you. It is harder when you have to bridge the gap and actually sacrifice something. Yeah. So that might be reputation. It might be money more commonly than not in this space. And it might just be ego. But I think the people that rise the occasion are willing to make the sacrifices that maybe put their own immediate advancement at risk and do it, commonly. And I think, especially in these spaces where we have to make a lot of choices that maybe challenge our integrity, choosing to say no, especially to a leader that's like, this is what quota will get us to. I think that those are really opportunities for us to be proud of the work that we do and understand the sacrifice.
I think that's a really interesting way to look at it. And it's a reminder that sometimes doing the thing that hurts the most in the moment is actually, from a bigger picture perspective, something we're going to look back on and say, boy, was that a hard decision, or that was a hard fought situation I had to get myself through. But in looking back, that decision has aged well versus a decision that feels nicer or is less conflict based in the moment. But looking back, you're thinking, oh, I can't believe I did that. That was not the right decision.
Consequences.
So, absolutely. Consequences. Liz, super interesting conversation. If people are meeting you for the first time through this episode and they would like to reach out and connect with you or to learn more, what is the best place for them to find you?
Oh, probably LinkedIn. Yeah.
Excellent. So we will definitely share a link to your LinkedIn profile on today's episode, regardless of where people are finding it. Liz, thank you so much for being with me.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sourcing Hero podcast. Join us again next time for more true stories of sourcing and business heroism performed by your colleagues and peers. Look for the Sourcing Hero wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe. Finally, don't forget, sourcing heroism is taking place all around us every day. Keep your eyes open and you're bound to see it. Until next time, I'm your host, Kelly Barnard. Stay well and always remember that you can be a hero too.